Hello and welcome to World Talks on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. Ukraine's accession to the EU has come into question since the Polish presidential elections on the 1st of June. President-elect Nawrocki has voiced his resistance to accession due to what he considers unresolved issues with Ukraine, specifically the massacre of up to 120,000 Poles by Ukrainian nationalists in Volhynia in 1943 to 1944. How big a hurdle is this to Ukraine's accession? Well, to explore this, we're joined by David Marples. He is Distinguished Professor at the University of Alberta. Welcome, Professor, and thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure.
Right, so the talks commenced and exhumations of the remains commenced around April. How would you characterize the relationship between Ukraine and Poland on this issue as they stand right now?
This is an issue that's never been satisfactorily resolved. There have been times when Ukrainian leaders have apologized for the event, but overall, I don't think there's been a consensus on the situation as it stands today, which is that Ukraine has moved in a direction where nationalists who were active in that period have been honored as national heroes. And when the memory laws were introduced after the after the uprising in 2014-15, they included the names of Roman Shukevich, the leader of the Ukrainian insurgent army, and Stepan Bandera, the overall leader of the nationalists, of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists. And these leaders are recognized even today in some memorial services, statues, street names, and others that have really increased as time has gone forward. So you could say that Ukraine recognizes these people who committed these crimes in Poland in 1943-44. That is not to say that all the members of these groups were war criminals, just that the specific wing of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, led by a guy called Kluchkivsky, committed these crimes, and these crimes have never really been condemned outright by Ukrainian leaders.
Right. I want to attach that to something that President-elect Nawrocki has said. There's a short video I'd like to share with you, and then I'll come back and ask some questions on that.
I am against Ukraine's entry into the European Union at this moment. I recognize that we need to support Ukraine. But Ukraine must understand that countries such as Poland, Hungary, other European states have their own interests. Poland has specific interests, such as the exhumation in Volhynia.
Right, so he talks about national interest as well, and he refers to agriculture, for example. But Volhynia is still a thorn in his side, it seems. And it sounds as though Ukraine hasn't really apologized for the actions of those few. Does President-elect Nawrocki have a point here?
He does have a point. I'm not sure whether, on the whole, these past events should have a profound impact on Polish support for Ukraine. But in a way, I felt recently that Ukraine is not really its best advertiser in terms of how it's looking at the past. Even under a Jewish president who one might assume would take a dim view of Ukrainian nationalists in this period, Ukraine has moved visibly to the right politically. And you see this particularly in the western Ukrainian cities, and Volhynia, of course, is in the northwest of Ukraine. But generally, I think, Ukraine is in a difficult position. It's looking for kind of national heroes who fought against the Russians in the past. And it naturally looks to this group, which fought against the Soviets into the early 1950s, as a kind of model. And in doing that, it's overlooked this sort of heinous crime of 1943, which is undeniable. I mean, perhaps you might argue about the overall numbers, but you cannot deny that it happened. And Ukraine's response has always been Well, we had a very difficult time in Poland, Western Ukraine, when it was under Poland in the interwar period. We were not given autonomy that we'd been promised. And also, you could say perhaps that other issues as well, like the operation to move Ukrainians out of Poland in the post-war period. Operation Vishla, for example. These always come up at the same time. But I don't think it would be a huge step for Ukraine to take to acknowledge that these crimes actually took place and issue an apology for them, and all would be done. And I think many historians in the West who are not particularly connected to either country realize this. We kind of wonder why. Why isn't this cleared up? And I think President Nawrocki has hit a sort of raw nerve by picking up this issue again on both sides. And it's creating a very difficult situation because Ukraine needs allies, and Poland has been its closest ally in the European Union. And something like 2 million Ukrainians have fled to Poland and are living there right now, particularly in the city of Warsaw.
Right. So it sounds like a bit of a stalemate. Ukraine perhaps realizes it's the right thing to do, but is trapped in this conflicting place. Now, who wins from this? Ukraine's attention is diverted on this historic issue. Poland, has been supporting Ukraine. Who wins? Certainly in the short term.
In the short term, I would say the winner is Vladimir Putin. He's the one who's going to benefit. And this is a perfect situation for him when the Ukrainians are having arguments, particularly about the past, because Putin is also focused on the Second World War. This has really been his identity formation issue for Russia. And therefore, there's no real winner between Poland and Ukraine. Neither side will benefit from this. On the other hand, it is an issue that needs some kind of resolution sooner or later. And I think probably this will be a good time for both sides to get together, maybe a scholarly conference or something like that, because really it's historians who argue over this issue. Political leaders pick it up, but they're not actually going to the archives and examining documents. Maybe they can see the results of exhumation and things like that, but they don't know much about it, frankly. And therefore, it's a matter of a sort of resolution on an academic level, reaching a consensus among historians, and then the governments of each country accepting this on a national level and coming to some kind of agreement. And I think it's essential that it happens. It is a little unfortunate it's come up right now when Ukraine is in the most difficult situation in the past 3 years. And it's been more or less abandoned by the American side, which is really given terms that are unacceptable to Ukraine, that is coming from Russia on territory they must give up in the eastern regions and southern regions. So Ukraine needs friends, and it doesn't need historical issues. But as I said, in a way, it's created this situation itself by elevating these people to hero status over the last few years.
Yes, but Professor, this is not something that's just come up for the first time, is it? It's been on the agenda for a number of years, but Ukraine seems to be dragging its feet. So in some ways, it's a problem of its own making, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think President Zelensky is in a situation where he's under the spotlight. He's a year and a couple of months over his natural term as president. So in theory, this would be the time you would have a national election in Ukraine. But he's argued that under martial law, this is not possible. Russia's picked up on this and called him an illegal president. And he's anxious now not to antagonize people in the armed forces, particularly units that embrace people like Bandera and Shukevich. And I think we all know who they are. They support Nazi regalia on uniforms. They've stood against portraits and statues of Bandera on a regular basis. And these are his backbone, if you like, of the regular army. It's getting very difficult to conscript troops, and he can't afford to lose troops. And if he sort of embraces the idea of recognizing this atrocity, then he will lose his position. I think that's fairly straightforward. He would lose his post he would be out of office, and that's the dilemma he's facing.
Right, so a precarious situation for President Zelensky. But zooming in now a little bit, what's the situation like on the ground in Volhynia and surrounding areas? How do local people feel about what happened there?
Well, apart from taking some kind of sociological survey, it's hard to tell. But it seems to me that Ukrainians are fairly unified across the country right now in supporting the war effort and Ukraine's aspirations to join the European Union, since NATO seems to be a non-starter now. And in Volhynia, it's no different, that these areas were, Polish territory, and Poles occupied sort of major urban areas, the Ukrainians, the rural areas. And since the war ended in 1945, we've seen a movement of Ukrainians into the towns. So they're now the occupants of the towns. And they're not anxious to bring this issue up. I mean, this is the last thing that they really would like to see. They're patriots. They support the Ukrainian war effort. And Ukrainians in the western regions, not only in Volhynia, but also in the Galicia region to the south, are the most nationalistic in Ukraine. And that's been the case if you look at every presidential election in Ukraine. The westward-leaning, let's say, pro-democracy, but also nationally conscious Ukrainians have always elected or voted for a particular candidate. And it's always been the anti-Russian candidate, the one who's perceived as the most vehemently opposed to the Moscow line. And I think it's the same today in Volhynia as it was then.
Yeah, it sounds to me as though what you're saying is that this Volhynia massacre should be part of the conversation at a time when serious discussions about EU accession start to take place, because they're most likely to actually gain some traction at that time. Would you agree?
I would agree. But I doubt President Nawrocki agrees. And I think he's made his statement now, and it's going to be kind of difficult to backtrack from that, having made such a strong statement without a response from Ukraine. I mean, he's kind of demanding a response from Ukraine.
Right.
And I think the question is how Ukraine will respond, whether it will say, as you just said, that this is not an issue that we should discuss now. We should wait till the war's over. But if you're talking a war that could last a decade, then he perhaps is right to bring it up now to sort of conclude it.
Absolutely.
And then Poland to bump up its support for Ukraine.
Unfortunately, Professor Marples, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you very much for sharing your insights with our audience. Have a good day, sir.
You too. You're very welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
That brings us to the end of this episode of World Talks. Goodbye.